My name is Daniel Cross, and I want to be clear about something from the start. I am not the kind of person who jumps at shadows. I don't believe every old building is haunted. I don't think every strange sound has meaning. I used to believe that if something could not be measured or recorded, it probably didn't matter. That belief ended the first December I lived in that house. I moved to Briar Hollow in late November, right before winter fully settled in. I had just taken a remote job and needed somewhere quiet, somewhere cheap, somewhere temporary. Briar Hollow looked harmless enough. One main road, a diner, a gas station that closed too early. The kind of town that feels half asleep even at noon. People waved, but they didn't ask questions. That should have told me something too. The house sat at the edge of town, backed up against a stretch of trees that looked darker than the rest of the landscape, even during the day. 2 stories, white paint peeling just enough to suggest age without looking abandoned. The yard was empty, no decorations, no toys, no signs of recent life. The rent was far lower than it should have been. I told myself I was lucky. The landlord was an older man named Caldwell, thin, quiet, the type who spoke like every word cost him something. When he handed me the keys, his hand lingered a second longer than necessary. "There's just one thing," he said. His voice wasn't dramatic, it wasn't ominous, it was careful. "Try not to use the back room in December." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it felt like the right response. People say strange things in small towns. "The guest room?" I asked. He nodded. "What happens in December?" I said. He didn't answer right away. He looked past me, toward the trees. "People don't stay long enough to find out." Then he left. I stood alone in the empty house with the keys cold in my palm, replaying his words. The silence inside the house felt thick, like the air hadn't been disturbed in a while. I told myself he was just eccentric or trying to scare me for his own amusement. I unpacked. The first week passed quietly. Cold nights, wind scraping against the siding, pipes knocking softly in the walls, all normal sounds for an old house in winter. I noticed the back room only because it felt untouched. No furniture, no marks on the walls, no outlet covers missing. It didn't smell musty or stale. It smelled like nothing at all, which somehow felt worse. I kept the door closed. December arrived quietly. No dramatic shift, no sudden storm, just colder mornings and longer nights. The first knock came just after midnight. I was half asleep on the couch, television on low, when I heard it. 3 slow knocks, evenly spaced. Not from the front door, behind me, from inside the house. I sat up, heart picking up speed, listening. The house went silent again. No footsteps, no movement, no wind. I stood and walked into the hallway, my socks brushing against the cold floor. The sound felt louder than it should have. I stopped in front of the back room door. I don't know how I knew the sound came from there. I just did. I waited, counted my breaths, told myself it was the house settling. Then I opened the door. The room was empty, but the air inside was colder than the rest of the house. Not drafty, not winter cold. It felt like standing in front of an open freezer. I closed the door and told myself I was overthinking it. That night, I slept in my bed for the first time since moving in. The next night, the knocks came again, same time, same rhythm. By the 3rd night, I stopped opening the door. That's when the sounds started changing. Scraping, slow, careful, like something testing the walls from the inside. Sometimes I heard what sounded like breathing, not loud, not urgent, just present. The hallway light flickered whenever I passed the door. Every morning, frost formed along the inside edge of the back room door, from the inside. I searched the house for explanations, broken insulation, old vents, hidden drafts. Nothing. By the second week of December, I started avoiding the hallway entirely. I took the long way around the house just to avoid passing that door. The knocking never stopped. It adapted. 3 knocks meant warning. 2 meant impatience. 1 meant something else entirely. I started dreaming about the room. Not nightmares, just the room, standing open, waiting. One morning I woke up with dirt under my fingernails. I don't remember leaving my bed. That was when I went to the town library. The building smelled like dust and old paper. The librarian barely looked up when I asked about the house. Her expression changed when I gave the address. She pulled out a box of old records and slid it across the desk without a word. The house had belonged to one family, the Harlans, one child, a boy named Samuel. He died in winter. Official cause, illness. Unofficial notes mentioned neglect. Locked inside during a storm, left alone too long, found too late. My hands were shaking when I read the last line. Complaints continued after death, sounds reported, pressure in structure, possible secondary presence. No explanation, no follow-up, just that phrase, secondary presence. That night, the knocking came earlier, and for the first time, I heard a voice, not outside the door, inside my head. Don't open it. And then, underneath that, something else, deeper, slower, waiting. I did not sleep much after reading Samuel Harlan's name. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the back room door in my mind, closed, waiting. The word secondary presence kept circling my thoughts like something unfinished. I tried to convince myself that knowing the history would make the fear easier to manage, that if this was just a ghost, a child who had suffered and never left, then maybe there was some logic to it, some rule I could learn. That was my mistake, because whatever lived in that house did not follow rules meant for the living. The knocking came again at 12:07 a.m., 3 slow knocks. I stayed in my bedroom, sitting upright, the door open, watching the dark hallway like it might blink. This time, after the knocks, I heard footsteps, small ones. They didn't come toward me. They paced the length of the hallway, back and forth, stopping directly outside the back room door. I could hear the faint sound of something brushing the walls, like fingertips trailing along the paint. Then a child's voice spoke, not loud, not crying, just tired. Please. The word landed in my chest harder than any scream could have. I stood before I realized I was moving. I took one step into the hallway, then another. Every instinct I had told me not to get closer, but something else pulled at me. Not curiosity, recognition. I stopped a few feet from the door. "Samuel?" I asked. Silence. Then, slowly, the doorknob turned. The door opened just enough for cold air to spill out. It rolled across the floor like fog, curling around my ankles. I saw the outline of a child standing inside, small shoulders, thin arms hanging stiffly at his sides. His back was to me. The room looked wrong behind him, deeper than it should have been, darker, like the walls didn't know where to stop. "Samuel," I said again, quieter this time. He turned his head just slightly. I never saw his face, but I felt his fear. It hit me all at once, not as a memory, not as an image, but as a weight, the kind of panic that makes your thoughts scatter,
the kind that comes from being trapped somewhere you can't escape, knowing no one is coming. Then the door slammed shut. The impact shook the hallway. The walls creaked like they were responding. I stood there long after the sound faded, my heart hammering, my breath shallow. When I finally forced myself to touch the door, it was coated in frost from the inside. I didn't open it again that night. The next day, I went back to the library. I asked for anything related to the Harlan family, not just the boy, everything. The librarian hesitated before bringing out another box, older, more worn. Inside were newspaper clippings, handwritten notes, and a single police transcript. Samuel had been sick that winter. Not dangerously so, according to the doctor. A fever, weak lungs. His parents had been warned to keep him warm, monitored. The night he died, there had been a storm, heavy snow, power outages across town. His parents left the house. They said they had locked him in the back room to keep him warm near a space heater. They said they were gone less than an hour. The heater tipped over. The room filled with smoke. By the time they returned, Samuel was already gone. What the papers didn't highlight, but the notes did, was this. Neighbors heard knocking that night, from inside the house, even after the parents returned, even after the boy was pronounced dead. The house had never been the same since. I drove home with that knowledge sitting heavy in my chest. That night, the knocks changed. They were no longer even. They came in bursts. 3, pause, 2, pause, 1. The final knock felt deeper, louder, like something heavier had struck the door. Then the voice came again, but this time it wasn't the child. "You stayed," it said. The words didn't come from the hallway. They came from everywhere at once, from the walls, the floor, the air itself. I backed into my bedroom and shut the door, locking it with shaking hands. The house creaked around me, not settling, but shifting, like something adjusting its position. That night, I dreamed I was standing in the back room. The walls were close, pressing in, the ceiling low enough that I could almost touch it. Samuel stood in front of me, his face still hidden in shadow. Behind him, something moved. Not a shape, not a figure, a presence. It pressed against the walls like breath behind skin. Samuel didn't look at it. He looked at me. "It's not me," he said. Then I woke up screaming. When morning came, the house looked normal again. Too normal. Sunlight streamed through the windows. The hallway looked harmless. But the back room door was open. Inside, the floor was covered in small, wet footprints. They didn't lead in. They led out, stopping right in the middle of the hallway, facing my bedroom door. I packed a bag that afternoon. I told myself I was leaving, but as I carried it to the front door, the house made a sound I hadn't heard before. It sighed, low, slow, satisfied, and I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that December wasn't done with me yet. I didn't leave. I stood at the front door with my bag in my hand, listening to the quiet hum of the house, and understood something I didn't want to admit. The house didn't want me gone. That thought didn't come as panic. It came as clarity, the same kind you feel when you realize a storm is already overhead and running would only leave you exposed. I set the bag down. The back room door closed on its own behind me. Not slammed, not rushed. Careful, deliberate. At night, I didn't bother pretending I would sleep. I sat in the living room with the lights on, every lamp glowing, the television muted. Midnight passed without knocking. Instead, the house began to breathe. Not literally,
not in a way I could explain with sound alone. It was more like pressure. The walls seemed to flex slightly, like something inside them was shifting its weight. The floor creaked in patterns that didn't match temperature change or age. I felt watched, not from one place, from everywhere. I said Samuel's name out loud, just to hear a human voice. The pressure eased. That told me more than I wanted to know. Whatever was in the house responded to attention. I returned to the library the next morning, my eyes burning from lack of sleep. This time, I didn't ask questions. I searched. Old town council notes, property records, anything that mentioned the house before the Harlans. That's when I found it. The house wasn't originally a family home. It had been built by a religious group that never stayed long. They used it as a winter shelter, a place for isolation and fasting, a place meant to strip people down to their weakest state. People died there, not often enough to draw attention, just enough to leave marks. One margin note caught my eye. Structure exhibits recurring auditory phenomena during winter months. Advisement: demolish. It was never demolished. The Harlans moved in a decade later. Samuel didn't create the haunting. He activated it. At night, the knocking didn't come from the door. It came from the walls. From the ceiling, from beneath the floor, I could hear something moving inside the house, dragging itself through spaces too small for any body. The child appeared again, standing at the end of the hallway. This time, I could see his face. Not burned, not injured, frozen. His lips were blue, his eyes glassy with something close to pleading. "It listens," he said. The words weren't spoken, they were placed in my mind. It learned my name. The temperature dropped instantly. My breath fogged the air. Behind him, the hallway stretched. The walls bowed outward like ribs expanding around a lung. Something exhaled, a sound too large for the space. I shut my eyes. When I opened them, the hallway was normal again, but the house was no longer pretending. Lights flickered constantly. The smell of damp earth followed me from room to room. Mirrors reflected movement behind me that wasn't there when I turned around. At exactly 3:12 a.m., the thing spoke again. "You stayed." The voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It vibrated through the floorboards and into my bones. "You can help." I understood then. Samuel wasn't the target. He was the bait. The house fed on isolation, on winter, on people who stayed too long. The child had been the first to notice it, to feel it, and when he died, something older learned how to use him. December wasn't when the house was empty, haunted. December was when it hunted. I stopped trying to leave, because now I knew if I ran, it would follow. Once I understood that the house followed rules, the fear changed. It didn't disappear, it sharpened. Random horror is frightening, but patterns are worse. Patterns mean intent. The first rule revealed itself the night after I stopped trying to leave. The knocking returned to the back room door. 3 slow knocks, always 3, never 2, never 4. If I stood still and listened, the knocking stopped. If I spoke, it answered. Not immediately, not loudly, just enough to remind me it was paying attention. The second rule came a few nights later. The house did not tolerate lights in the hallway after midnight. The first time I left one on, the bulb burst with a sharp pop. Glass scattered across the floor. The second time, the entire circuit died, plunging the house into darkness.
In the dark, the walls whispered. I learned to move slowly, to breathe quietly, to treat the house like a sleeping animal. The third rule was the worst. The back room must never be entered in December. The door was not a barrier, it was a boundary. Crossing it meant stepping into something unfinished. I discovered this when the door opened again on its own. Inside, the room was different. The walls were damp, darkened by streaks that looked like frozen condensation. The floor felt uneven beneath my feet, like it wasn't solid anymore. Samuel stood inside, his shape flickering like a reflection in disturbed water. "It wants me to bring you," he said. I stepped back. The door shut without a sound. From that night on, the house began preparing. The temperature dropped faster than the weather outside. Ice formed along window frames. The sound of wind was replaced by low, rhythmic pressure, like breath moving through lungs. Every night, I dreamed of countdowns, clocks without hands, calendars missing pages, a single number repeating, 1. I checked the date, December 31st, New Year's Eve. The house wasn't active all winter. It was building towards something. I went to the town office one last time, looking for any record of what happened here on New Year's Eve in the past. There was one mention, a brief police note from years before Samuel's death. A tenant had disappeared on December 31st. No body, no evidence, just an abandoned house and a door locked from the outside. The case was closed as a runaway. The house learned something that night. It learned it could keep what entered. On the morning of December 31st, the house was silent, too silent. No knocks, no whispers, no movement. The air felt heavy, like the moment before a storm breaks. I packed my bag again, not because I believed I could leave, but because the act felt important, like preparing for something you can't avoid. As evening fell, the house grew colder. At 11:58, every clock in the house stopped. The silence pressed against my ears. At 11:59, the back room door began to open, slowly, without a sound. The air inside moved, breathing, waiting. Samuel stood just inside the threshold. "It wants me to bring you," he said. The voice behind him spoke at the same time. "Stay." The house leaned inward. At midnight, the room was no longer a room. The moment the clock would have struck midnight, the house inhaled. That is the only way I can describe it. The walls pulled inward slightly, as if the structure itself were drawing breath. The temperature plunged so fast, my lungs burned when I tried to inhale. The air smelled old, not like dust or rot, but like something that had been sealed away for a very long time. The back room was open now, fully open, but it was no longer a room. The walls inside stretched far beyond the dimensions of the house. The ceiling arched upward into darkness that didn't reflect light. The floor beneath my feet felt soft, uneven, as if I were standing on something that shifted under my weight. Samuel stood just inside. He looked clearer than before, more solid. His small hands were clenched at his sides, his shoulders hunched like he was bracing himself against a cold wind only he could feel. Behind him, something vast moved. Not forward, not backward, it pressed outward. The thing had no face, no shape I could understand. It existed as pressure, as presence. The longer I looked, the more my eyes refused to focus on it, like my mind was protecting itself. "You stayed," the voice said. This time it came from inside my head. "You learned." I felt something tug at me, not physically, emotionally, like a hand closing around the part of me that wanted to give in, that wanted rest, that wanted silence. The house wanted a replacement. Samuel was never meant to be the only one. "I won't," I said, My voice shook, but the words were mine. The pressure increased, the walls groaned, the air vibrated with a low hum that rattled my teeth. Samuel turned toward me. "It only works if you choose it," he said. "That's the rule." I looked at him, really looked, not at the ghost, not at the fear, at the child who had been left alone in the dark, locked in a room with something that learned his name and never let him forget it. "What happens if I don't?" I asked. Samuel's expression softened. "Then I can go." The thing behind him reacted. The pressure surged violently. The house shuddered. Frost spread across the hallway walls like veins. The knocking returned, louder now, coming from everywhere at once. 3 knocks, over and over. The house screamed. I stepped backward. The doorway resisted, like the space itself didn't want to let me go. The air clung to my skin, heavy and cold, trying to pull me back inside. "I'm not yours," I said. The voice roared inside my skull. "Stay!" I crossed the threshold. The moment my foot hit the hallway floor, the room collapsed inward. The door slammed shut with a force that sent me stumbling back. The pressure vanished instantly, like a lung emptying. The house exhaled. Silence followed, not the tense silence of before, a real one. I stood there shaking, my breath loud in the stillness. Slowly, the temperature began to rise. The frost melted away, dripping harmlessly onto the floor. The back room door remained closed. I never heard knocking again. I left the house at dawn. The sky was pale, washed out like the world after a long storm. Briar Hollow looked ordinary again, harmless, just another quiet town waking up to a new year. The landlord never returned my calls. A month later, I saw the house listed online. Available December 1st. I don't know where Samuel went. I don't know if he found peace or simply escaped. What I do know is this: some houses are not haunted because of what died inside them. They are haunted because of what stayed. And every December, when the world grows quiet and people lock their doors against the cold, I listen, because somewhere a house is knocking and someone is deciding whether to answer.
People talk about ghosts like they're stuck in the past. I don't think that's true. I think some of them are waiting for someone to understand the rules, waiting for someone to stay. If this story followed you into the silence, like a sound you can't quite place, make sure to like this video and subscribe to Death ReHaunt. Tell me in the comments what you think. Do haunted places choose their victims, or do they wait for the ones who are willing to listen? And if you ever hear knocking from inside your house in December, don't open the door.